Hi, everybody. We're back.
Hi.
And this is Matthew and Doug, and we're both trying to bring some technology and AI and share how it's impacting our work.
Yep.
This week, we have something exciting because Matthew's been working on a project. We've probably mentioned it in the past, but it's where he got started in using MCP servers. And Matthew, the way that this journey went with your getting into MCP servers with FieldWorks,
hmm
the outcome was very different than what you were expecting. As I understand,
Yeah.
you started working with MCP servers to make scripts for FlexTools. Is
Actually, I
that right?
started working. I started working with our chip AI bots
Okay.
quite a few months back because I wanted to create a bot that was smart enough to help someone create a FlexTool script, which is a macro script for FieldWorks. And I didn't
Okay.
have much luck doing it that way. Yeah.
And CHIP is the system that we use for our
Software
support
support
agents,
bots. Yep.
right?
Yep. That's
So,
correct.
so that's what got you into MCP servers.
Yep.
And then how did you start? I guess it was through that use of it to access the FieldWorks and write scripts for the Flex tools.
Yeah, I've been needing to write flex tools for people to be able to do the types of bulk edits that you can't do directly in FieldWorks. And so, as I said, I was looking for a way to assist that. I had run into a few other MCP servers out there that were just really slick ways of accessing and modifying information. And so I was like, I think maybe with some pre-work that I've done, I could probably build an MCP server. So,
Okay. So the goal here is FieldWorks is our lexical database that contains all of the entries for a language.
mhm.
And Flex Tools was developed to enable you to run scripts on your data to do certain changes across a whole database.
That's or individual changes or mass changes. Yeah. Inside Flex, you can filter and you can run bulk edits on one field or another, but you can't compare. It doesn't have a way to compare fields. So it can't look at this one and look at this one and then make a decision and modify it in a certain way. So whenever you have conditional logic or something like that, or you're reaching into fields that are not already accessible through the bulk edit tools, then you're sort of stuck. FlexTools was written by Craig so that it would be available for you to be able to create more complex queries and lookups. But yeah, so there we are.
Okay, so our session today is entitled the MCP Connection, Talking to Your Dictionary.
Yep.
So that's
We're going to get
kind of the
there.
exciting part. And you're going to share with us now a presentation that
hmm
kind of journals your journey, how you first started writing these scripts and then
Yep.
came to a realization that it was much more powerful than you first realized.
Yes. So yeah. So starting off, MCP servers are sort of a universal plug that you can use to connect things to the LM tool that you're using. So if you're using Claude or Gemini, you can use an MCP server to give it access to things that it normally can't see or do. Some of those files may be local on your computer, some of them may be on a server somewhere. But so let me go to the next one. There we go.
It kind of brokers access to a whole bunch of different things that
It
you
does.
tell it about.
Exactly. Whatever tools you give it, it can give access to your LLM at that time. So the big challenge is that FieldWorks is a massive library with written in C sharp, and C sharp has its own object-oriented complexities that don't make it not for any fault of the developers, but for someone who is not a developer, it's very hard to use. Python is a more human readable method of interacting with things that tends to work better for linguists. And so FlexTools was developed not by me to be a front end to this. You make simple calls here, it does the complexity underneath and gives you access to what's in the database. So the big challenge and the reason that something like this MCP server needs to exist is if if you're AI has access to the source code, it may go out and find a function and then realize, oh, this is how you call the function, and it will make it work. But very often, if it's not given the information right up front, it will write something that looks right, but the function that it's calling in your code just doesn't exist.
Hmm.
So it'll be like, oh, run the delete lexeme option, and then turns out delete lexeme doesn't even exist. So this is a huge problem when it's on your coding, that it writes really good self-contained code, but when it tries to call your code, it doesn't know how to do it. So the part that the first bit of pre-work is I ended up completing the FLExLibs API. So FLExLibs is the underlying piece that allows FlexTools to do its work. And so the Flex has over 2,000 unique C# objects or classes that can be called. There's lots of
Wow.
different things inside. It's a very complex beast. And
So,
you can't just take all of that and put that into an LLM and expect it to process it. It's just too much. Yeah?
yeah.
Okay. So it also uses very complex terminology and labels. There's this OS that an AC, an OC, an RA. So like this thing has objects that it's linked to that are this thing, but there are different types of links. Just very complex, and even at this point for me, it's still complex to figure out how do I get from here to something I can use.
Right. So
Yep.
you're trying to get the code
Mm-hmm.
to be able to reach into the guts of the dictionary software and make
Exactly.
modifications.
Yep.
And C# is definitely not the way to do it because it's so complicated.
Well, it is a way to do it, but it's not a way that is friendly for someone who's thinking in linguistics. You have to be thinking as a programmer.
Okay.
So FlexLibs is great. It's linguist friendly. The functions that exist are make sense, and you're calling it with things that make sense. And it wraps a lot of the complexity of that C# code in linguist friendly Python. But it only had about 70 functions. And I just said there's 2,300 objects. And so basically, to access most parts of the grammar, also, you could only access a few fields, and then there were just huge chunks of Flex that you just couldn't touch. The only way you could touch it was to go back and learn the C# way to access those things. So you had to learn to navigate a bunch of different types of code. So you can edit the lexeme in Python with FlexLibs, but you can't edit the allomorph. You can read the custom field with FlexLibs, but you can't edit some of its parameters. And then there are just many things you just can't access because it hasn't been cast in the right class. So I used a swarm of AI agents over Christmas, and I sat down and had it complete, create, read, update, delete, clone, and merge for all the types of objects in Flex that made sense for it to do. Ended up coming up with 1,400 functions that reached deep into every bit of Flex. And so that I proposed as FlexLibs 2.0. It hasn't been integrated as part of FlexLibs, but I'm still tweaking it, and that is the groundwork. So once we got the groundwork, then this is when I started thinking about MCPs. The problem when we go back to that coming up with a syntactically plausible but wrong answer is that it needs to know everything that it could possibly call. And it needs to know that in a succinct way, because if you give it all of the answers, it's not going to be able to parse them. You need to give it targeted answers. So I wanted to make it indexable, searchable. So I used these methods, code reflection and AST analysis, and I created documentation about the C# library and my Python library that an AI can use when it searches.
So all of those 2000.
All those 2,300 on the C# side, the 1,400 on my side, and then the 70 on the original FlexLib side.
Okay.
So putting that all together, this is how the process works when you're using the MCP server. So the user makes a request. Find all entries where the lexeme form and the citation form match exactly and clear the citation form. Just
Okay.
the way that Flex works. If you have a citation form is the version that prints in your dictionary. If the lexeme form and the citation form are the same, it doesn't do you any good, and it actually is likely to cause you errors in the future when you change one and forget to change the other. So this is a nice cleanup that you might want to do on a Flex database that you can't do inside Flex.
Okay, and we're starting to get to the exciting part because it just sounds like you were talking with your dictionary there.
That's right. This is the request. This is the request that you would have once you get set up, and this is the sort of request that you can make that it will run. So what in response, what the MCP server does is it looks up all the functions that are related to lexeme and citation field. The MCP server will give back a list of features that it can use. And so then your AI tool will choose the ones that seem to be relevant, and it will use those as building blocks to write a macro that does what you've asked it to do. Once it's written that macro, you can test the macro in read-only mode. And if you like the results, then you can have it run, and we'll have run that macro, that Python code to change the database. So I don't have 1,400 tools that your AI is calling. It actually really boils down to about 7 tools, well, 8 tools there. And so, but the big one is search by capability. So this is the power tool that says, hey, I want to search by gloss. Give me all the functions that are related to gloss. Once it finds something it's interested in, then it can call this get object API and get details. And then if it's trying to figure out how do you get between this object and this object, it can use this get navigation path. So how do you get from the lexeme to a field on the sense? What's the structure in between?
And
Resolve.
that can be pretty
Yes.
complicated in FieldWorks because you have entries and then you have
Mm-hmm.
senses. I think you can even have subsenses, so there can be
Mm-hmm.
multiple layers to move between all of that in the hierarchy.
And believe it or not, there are actually extra layers between that you've never seen inside the C# code. So it gets messy fast. This resolve property is useful. There's just this weirdness about C# that if you find an object, that object, let's say it's a sense object, and then you're like, hey, what are the properties of that object? If you haven't recast it correctly, it doesn't have the properties that it's supposed to have. And so basically this is a reverse search. Hey, I wanted to find this field and I can't see it right now. Why can't I see it? And it'll tell you, oh, well, it has to be cast this way. And then find example code. That's pretty clear. Find examples of when it was used. So once it has built the tool, then it can create your FlexTools module, it gets the template, and then it can, well, this is the start module, and then it can run the module. So once it's built the module, it can run the module.
Okay,
So
but this
yeah,
this was all the precursor yet, where
this is still the precursor.
you
Yeah,
were building a script now with
that's
this.
right. Yep.
Okay.
So this is FlexTools MCP. This is what it was. But the turning point was that I realized that at the moment that I realized that I could run that script and it was working, I realized that I didn't have to go through the script anymore. I didn't have to go through creating a FlexTools module. I could just
Okay.
have a conversation with the MCP server and literally just make one-off changes in my dictionary.
Wow.
So yeah, so we're going to be looking at some examples here, and actually there was a slide for that. But yes, so there's a new tool, run operation. So execute the operations directly against a project. So if you don't need it for running it 100 times across 100 projects, just run it. So before we dive into it, I just want to say there are some caveats. Right now, there are no guardrails. If you ask it to delete all the entries or delete something else that's important was supposed to be the word, it will do so. And so you want to have a backup of your data. It's running locally on your machine, so it's running on the copy of Flex that's installed and the copy of your database. It's not the most efficient way of it doesn't always follow the most efficient path to get where it's going. It figures out every time how to get from your request to code, and it might figure out a different way if you ask it or ask it at a different time. And if you ask it the same question twice in different chats, it will have to figure it out both times. It's not currently remembering, oh, this is the way I solved that last time.
Hmm.
Yeah. And the other thing is, this is not a standalone tool. You have to plug it into an LLM coding tool. So that would be plugging it into Claude Code, Anti-Gravity or Gemini or Copilot. For Anti-Gravity, there is a free tier, but for the others, you pretty much have to pay to get anything useful done. So right now, this is going to be targeting people that are already involved in some programming work, but this may end up being hosted because the FlexTools team or the Flex team is really interested in this. So here's an example of some code that I ran. So what are the grammatical categories? I put in parentheses POS in this project, and how many entries does it have? And it chugs for a little while. and then it comes back and it gives me that report. So now we can open up FlexTools MCP and try it. And so I'm going to start with that request of, well, actually, I'll let Doug come up with some requests or a request of what we want to add here or what we want to do here. So let me get it pulled up here. So I have a test database that has a few entries in it, and I have an Esperanto database, but maybe we'll start with a read-only query. So this is my Esperanto database with lots of entries in it, loading. There we go, with 6,000 or 15,000 entries in it.
Okay.
What would you want to know? What might you want to know about a database?
So I'm trying to think of the lexical terminology for this,
Hmm.
but I'd like to know how many nouns
Okay.
have plural forms that are not the standard,
Okay.
like mouse and mice. Okay, so you don't have mouses, so
Okay.
they're irregular
Yes.
irregular forms of
So that would
plurals.
actually be searching for allomorphs. And unfortunately, I chose
Yeah.
the most regular language that exists of Esperanto. So that's going to be a hard request to do. So, all right, let's try something different. So let's just try something simple. Let's initialize. All right, so let's say start the FlexTools MCP in the Esperanto project. So I have to do this start process, and it sets some defaults. One of those defaults is that currently it's in read-only mode, but it also lets it know, okay, we're ready to go. So let's just start by asking how many entries are in this database. Okay. And this is the tool it's running. It runs this search by capability. I'm going to allow that from now on because that's a safe operation to do. And so it's searching to find, okay, and it's already ready. It's already figured out the bits and pieces it needs. There is an entry here that says get entries or total number of entries. And now it wants to run the operation. I'm going to let it do that. And takes a moment. So it's actually running Python code outside of the LLM that makes that run. Okay, it's figured out it needs to dig a little bit deeper into the API because something didn't work. This is what I was saying about it's got to figure things out, but it's still way more efficient at figuring it out than I am. So it runs through a little bit of processing here. Trying again. Now, in the future, as I say, putting in workflows that like, hey, here's something that people call often. Let's make that a workflow.
Hmm.
Makes sense, but here we go. Lexicon all entries. Yep. So every time it runs success false, it is iterating, it's reading the debug information, and it's figuring out, oh, I actually need to do this, this, and this. Okay. It's reading some logs. It's trying to figure out why it didn't work. Success true. Okay, it's building the module. And there we go. The result, or yes. Now, that took a while to get that response. Hello, this is Future Matthew. Just wanted to cut in for a moment, and you saw it thrashing around and trying several things and failing before it worked. That's because it was not instructed to run the template tool early on, and now it has been instructed to do that, and so you shouldn't see that error again. Have fun. But because it had to figure it out. So, but let's look now. So, what are the grammatical categories in this database? All right, it's going to get those. It's now slightly smarter than it was before because it is figured out some of the bits and pieces it needs to access this database specifically in this chat.
Mhm.
Now, I'll dig in later and figure out why it's okay. It's learning about how to call POS operations right now. That means part of speech. And these cutesy terms are something that some of that Claude and some others do that just tell you that it's working and it hasn't crashed. Computing, meandering, it's running that operation. Success. There we go. So 13 parts of speech and 4 grammatical categories. So we have all of these
Okay.
things. And it's not only has it found what they are, but it's also given me a count on how many of those exist. So give me some examples of, let's give me 5 examples of locutions. Okay. So now it's going to figure out how to do that.
Okay. So just randomly going to pull out 5 examples from the data.
Off the top, yep. So it will filter it, and then it'll filter it down to 5. Yep. Now the details are here as to what it's actually calling. Like you can see this sort of fades into gray, which means that there's more information here about the query that it's actually running that you can go back and read. Okay. All right. And so there are definitely a lot of ways that this could be made more efficient, and that will happen in the future.
Well, at the same time,
Mhm.
one of the benefits of AI is that you can set it working and go away. And
Yeah, put your hands up. Yeah.
so it doesn't, and I guess there is a way to make this more efficient,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, you probably wouldn't be asking it for how many entries are in your database
Yes,
because you can see that right on the screen in FieldWorks.
exactly.
But it's the more complicated things that we're, you know, still figuring out how ways that we can
Mm-hmm.
use this. And some of the complexity of this, or a lot of the complexity, will
Mm-hmm.
be hidden from the user
Yep.
because it might be built into something like the online Flex database.
Yep. So here we are. Here's the result. It's come up with 5 examples of locutions. And so let's do something fun here, just as a final demo here. So I'm going to go into Esperanto and I'm going to open up an entry. And let's say, okay, so right now, I'll turn off hidden fields. So right now, I don't have any French glosses. And so let's say I want it to propose some French glosses for the entries that it just found. So
Ah,
I don't have French glosses for these entries. Propose some French. Actually, I just propose some for these entries based on the English gloss. Now, the AI probably knows Esperanto, but I'm not depending on that right now. So it's now going to use its understanding of French. Okay, add these to the right writing system of, oh, actually, sorry, I need to do something here. So enable write mode.
yeah. I was going to say, because I thought we were in
Yep,
read-only mode. So,
there we go. Yep. So, okay, there we go. Write mode is enable. Warning, database modifications. Okay. So, yes. So, 1, it's asked for 3. It says, would
oh,
you like me to?
wait a minute.
Yep.
Hold on.
Okay.
So you didn't even tell it what you're going to do. You started typing. Was it listening to you?
No, I was, yeah, it wasn't listening to me. There's no audio in Claude Code.
No,
Yeah.
I'm just saying
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it knew what you wanted to do when you enabled write mode. it said add the French glosses you proposed,
Well, it's figured out from the flow that, hey, I
right?
was just asking it for glosses. I enabled write mode. What am I going to do next?
Right.
Yeah, and this was not my code. This is the AI doing this. So yes. So
Hmm.
I'm going to say, so it gave me option one. So I was like, yes, and make sure it gets added to the French writing system. I don't know if I need to clarify this, but I'm going to. There we go. And so it's actually using that one, and it's like, and so it knows, okay, add the glosses. It's working, and it's got to figure out how to work with the French writing system.
Yeah, it's interesting that you put that in there because you're you're thinking like a programmer there, like
I,
somebody who knows the
I
system.
am,
And I
yeah,
know the average user wouldn't think that way. They'd be like, oh, just add the French glosses. So
yeah.
it would be interesting at
It
some
might
point.
do it,
Yeah.
right, but it has less likelihood that it's going to do it at this point. Yeah, it's at this point you want to be pretty precise. It has a dictionary of similar words, so like lexeme and word and gloss and definition. Like it knows that those are people may be fuzzy on the way that they use those terms, but it also doesn't know that capital Esperanto is different than lowercase or is the same as lowercase Esperanto for like a project name. So it's run the operation and
But, when I was talking about the time it takes,
hmm
like even if it were slow at adding all of those,
yep, there we go.
that's something that you could do to like all 15,000 entries and just set it working and walk away. And
Exactly.
it adds the whole
Okay.
French translation.
So here we go. Let's refresh it. I'm gonna just a about Flex wants you, or it's better to leave and come back to the lexicon just to make sure that things have refreshed. Flex was open, but okay. So now I can look for that. Look for one of those entries. Here we go, and da da da
There it
da.
is.
Table d'ailleurs. I have no idea what that. I mean, I have no idea
Lagur.
even what that means, but it has figured it out and it has added a French gloss based on the English
Wow.
gloss. And it gets really deep. I have added new phonological rules and phonemes and things like and environments just by describing, hey, actually this one or yeah, so add a new environment that does this. So as far as you really want to dig into it, all of this stuff that is in here is accessible through this model as long as you have an idea of what to call it and you can work with it. But I am super excited about this, and a bunch of folks that I've talked to on the Flex team are super excited about this because once we add some handholding and guardrails and workflows, this can be something that can be very, very useful for people because this is not something you could have done in Flex. Well, not easily without, getting an API key and doing a whole lot of pre-coding. And even just that cleanup of the citation field that I was talking about is not something you can do in Flex. It has features now for merging and duplicating things that Flex does not have. So if you have two senses and you want to merge it, it'll figure out, well, these are actually the same text, so I'm just going to leave that as it is. This is different. I've got to either duplicate it or something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So that was the demo. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So I think we started out with an example that might have been leaving people feel a little discouraged at the amount of time it took to add up to the 15,000 entries.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, but
Uh-huh.
then when you suddenly think of an application, I mean, that's part of the thing. Part of the problem is we're not even thinking of the potential applications of this.
Mm-hmm.
And when you realize that you could get it to add a whole new language field to your database and go
Mm-hmm.
ahead and fill it with draft versions that you could then check on,
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I did something similar working with someone, and I actually, when I edited the field, I made a copy of the original field and left that in the import residue field. So he could go back and filter on that field, and he would know, oh, this is what it was, this is what it is now. He could verify that everything was as it was, because I don't know the language. And then once he was happy with all the entries, he could just delete that extra copy of it. So you can build in safeguards for your processes so that you know what has been changed, or you can have it add an extra letter or, a star or something in there and then delete it later. But yeah,
Okay.
we've got a few folks that are already using this to support people with their FlexWorks data or Flex databases. And so maybe eventually it'll get renamed to Flex MCP instead of FlexTools MCP, but it was developed initially to write FlexTools.
Okay. Well, before we sign off, Matthew,
Hmm.
if somebody wanted to play with this now,
Yep.
what instructions do you have for them?
There's lots of documentation. Let me pull that up here. Well, actually, it's in my presentation, so let me just share from there. There we go.
With, of course, the caveat that if you do mess with your FieldWorks database,
I'm not responsible.
please back it up before you
Yes.
start using this.
And also don't do a send receive until you're sure that the changes that have been made are okay. But yes, so this is the website, and so I'll open that up. And I've been adding documentation to this. So on the pages here, it explains why it exists, the process for getting it set up. You have to download the tool, and you have to download FLExLibs 2 because it works best with that, which is my version. And then at that point, you can test it. And then you have to put it in Claude or Anti-Gravity or another tool. And I've got some examples here of how to do that and then how to use it. So I've had one user that has already installed this without me getting involved, which is a milestone. Another user got into some issues because my documentation wasn't up to date, and I improved that. But I think it's ready. And so there's some other examples there. List entries with this symbol in the head word. So you can use it for searches. But yeah, so that documentation and on that page there, and eventually this may move to an SIL folder, but that's where it lives for now in my repo.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing, Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited about the possibilities
Mm-hmm.
going forward. And it would be really nice at some point to get a tool like this built into the lexicon itself,
Yes.
whether that is FieldWorks or the name escapes me. What's the
FieldWorks Lite or
FieldWorks? Yeah,
Combine or yeah.
FieldWorks Lite. So that will be something to look forward to. But thank you all for joining us again for another podcast. I don't know what's in store for next week, but then
We'll find out.
we wouldn't know because we haven't dealt with it yet.
It hasn't been built yet.
We're going to discover something new this coming week, and we're going to share it next week. So thanks for
Yep.
joining, and see you then.
Thank you.